Welcome to a very special episode of our podcast From Field to Shelf, the podcast for sustainable agricultural supply chains. And you might ask, why is this podcast so special? Well, because we have Wendy Arenas with us here, who came all the way from Colombia to give us some insights on the Cocoa Forests and Peace initiative at the annual meeting of the Sustainable Agricultural Supply Chains Initiative, the INA. Hello, Wendy. It is a pleasure to have you here. And before we get into what the Cocoa Forests and Peace Initiative is, maybe you can tell us something about yourself.
Thank you, Tilo and Lena, for inviting me to this podcast. I love it. And it's great to be here in Vaughan and have been able to participate in the INA workshop of 1 year of reflections on how INA is going. And let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm not going to say my age, but maybe I will. Who knows? Very soon is going to be my birthday. I'm an anthropologist and political science. I've worked for the last 20 or so years in sustainable development, in corporate social responsibility, with communities in the Amazon, having dedicated much of my life also to have incidents in public policies. In a way, an activist, but I'm a true believer of working towards solutions where all different stakeholders sit and work together in order to have sustainable solutions.
Thank you very much, Wendy. And before we having a closer view on the Cocoa Forest and Peace Initiative, let's talk a little bit about the political situation in Colombia. The situation was dominated by the conflict between the FARC and the government for years. And in 2016, the peace agreement was ratified. And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the situation and describe what changed after 2016.
That's a great question, and it's important to understand the context a little bit. Colombia has lived for the last 60 years internal conflict, what is known as an internal conflict, where people do not agree with the actual government or what the establishment has put into place. And that disagreement came from another peace process that was given through a time in the 1950s called La Violencia, the violence, where the two main parties, the liberal and the conservatives, were fighting together in a very brutal and violent war. And it was also a war between the rural country and the urban country. And it was also a conflict between the more conservative and the more liberal. And as part of the agreement, the Liberal Party had some armed forces, let's say, in the countryside, and there was an agreement that wasn't fulfilled completely. And because it wasn't fulfilled, some of those, what they were called the armed group of the Liberal Party, decided to create Las FARC. So the FARC is built up, or it's born out of an unfulfilled peace agreement 50 or 60 years ago. So we've had a recurrent history of unfulfilled peace agreements. So the importance of the peace agreement that was signed in 2016, actually we celebrated 3 years of the peace agreement 2 days ago, was very much supported by the people. The difference in the plebiscite, the government of the President Santo took a decision that was criticized by some to make it ratified by the people. It had never happened before. And so the ratification of the peace agreement became the antesala, as you say in Spanish, the pre-elections that would take place in 2018. And so it became part of the political agreement. And there was a big campaign in order to go against opposing the agreement with the FARC, which was very much one of the political flags or one of the political banderas of the opposition of El Presidente Santos, and it won only a difference of 50,000 people. The plebiscite was more than 10 million voters. So the difference was really, really small. And immediately after the plebiscite came through, thousands of people came the next day to the streets, and we had a lot of marches through all the country supporting the peace agreement, which gave support to the government to sit back again in the table. After 6 years of negotiating, sit down again with the FARC, because with whom do you have to negotiate again? With the FARC, and say, okay, let's listen to those who have led the movement of the no, and see what they are criticizing and what it is that they want to change. And there were, of course, some concessions. Most 90% of the claims were introduced into a new agreement that was signed a month later. However, there was a big group of opposition against the no that ended up in the elections of last year, winning the presidential elections. And so, in a way, the political discussion polarized the peace agreement. But the peace agreement, in my own view, has been the most important thing that has happened in the last 60 years in Colombia. It means the possibility of writing a new history. It means the possibility of getting to areas that the country that have been banned for many, even and for most of the people who live there. So it means a process of reconciling between ourselves. And I think that compromise, and particularly the issues related with the point one of rural development, are critical for our country and the future. So for me, supporting the implementation of the peace agreement has been and will be critical for the next 50 years of our country.
I have a small additional question, because at the moment there are a lot of demonstration going on in Colombia, and I only know what is written in the newspapers, and they always talk about the very fragile peace in Colombia. And do you think the actual protest and demonstration are threatening the peace in Colombia?
I think the opposite. They're strengthening it, because the protests that has happened in the last week are symptomatic in terms that, of course, actually the last time there was a massive protest was 42 years ago. So signing the peace agreement has given the chance of the opportunity of a much more profound change in society. The young people, the workers, the urban dwellers, citizens, want to go out and start to talk and dialogue like never before had happened. And so I think, on the contrary, it's reinforcing the importance of the peace agreement, because one of the issues that have been put forward in this protest is implement the peace agreement. There's another very important issue is there's been a lot of killings of social leaders in the rural areas where the conflict took place. And the people in the cities are saying, we don't want to tolerate this anymore. We don't want this type of violence in our country. We want to live a different country, a country that the peace agreement has opened the door and the possibility of living. There's also been manifestations against the killing of the FARC, because there has been some recurrent killings. We couldn't say systematic, because systematic is a very strong concept, but we could say there have been recurrent killings of the FARC who deposed the arms by other members of the FARC that haven't deposed the arms and had stayed mainly in illegal activities, illicit activities, cocaine and other criminal activities. So people are saying, protect the FARC that have given their arms, have deposed their arms. So there's also students protesting at the large. This is a student protest that has come together with the unions. Unions in Colombia are very small. Only 10% of our workers are unionized. However, they've had a strong movement and they got together with the students. But it was a very, very spontaneous manifestation of people wanting to see something different. And I think this is pressuring the structure, the government to open doors for dialogue and have a stronger commitment for the peace agreement. It's something that is happening around the world, but in Colombia, of course, it has a special, let's say, light to it, given our signing of the peace agreement. In the end, we all want the peace agreement to be implemented. Who wants to live in a country of conflict? You can't imagine how hopeful it is to be able to travel all around the country, which is beautiful, to places you couldn't go before because of the conflict, and realize all the things that we've lost, all the things that we don't know about our country, all the potential that these regions have, all the possibilities for peasants there that have been caught in the middle of the conflict. So I think the young people particularly are saying, we're not willing to go back to the old times.
Yeah, let's talk a little more about the opportunities you see for rural development with the background of the peace agreement and the Cocoa Forests and Peace Initiative itself has the word peace in it. How do you see those three terms that are part of this initiative working together? How do you see the opportunities for the cocoa sector? Because in a lot of countries where the cocoa production is very high, like in, for example, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, cocoa is often seen as driving deforestation, for example. So what's the difference for that in Colombia for you?
Yes, I think there's big differences, and mostly Europe know about cocoa of West Africa, of Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. This is your main source of cocoa. Actually, is the main source of cocoa beans from West Africa are 80% of what the market worldwide consume. However, cocoa in Latin America, and in particular in Colombia, hasn't been a driver of deforestation. And this is very important to keep in mind. And I say it recurrently in my conversation, I repeat it because that is a big difference between Africa and Latin America and between Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Colombia. In Colombia, we have growing cocoa almost in every part of the region. Colombia is a country that has plains, has the Caribbean Sea, the Pacific Oceans. We have our mountain range of the Andes, and we have the Amazon. So you grow cocoa from the sea level all the way up to 1,300 feet. So it's a crop that can grow everywhere. It's grown everywhere, and it's part of our tradition. Colombia is one of the biggest consumers of cocoa, and the other difference with West Africa is that Colombia has their own industry. We produce 190,000 hectares of cocoa, and almost, I would say, 90% or more is consumed in Colombia. So we have a very strong national industry, which is also something that is very different from West Africa. And our cocoa hasn't deforested because we have them we don't have agro industry for cocoa. It's small farming. It's very similar to our coffee. It's small farmers, maybe 5 hectares, which 2 hectares are for cocoa. And so when the peace agreement was coming to its final signing, it was maybe in 6 months that you could see that the peace agreement would be signed. We started to work, and I speak in first person because I was senior advisor for the High Commissioner on Post-Conflict, advising on the implementation of Point 1, which is rural development, on all sustainability. And we started to see what was the activities were happening, productive activities or initiatives, and cocoa started to emerge as a production or crop that is grown in all the areas where the post-conflict, where the agreement would be implemented. But it also had something very important. Besides that, it doesn't deforest. It's a crop that in an agroforestry arrangement can restore areas that have been degraded either because of the coca production or because of the expansion of the agriculture, but specifically the cattle frontier. Grass has been and land grabbing one of the main issues also of deforestation. And so we started to see that cocoa was an opportunity in arrangements, in agroforestry arrangements, an opportunity to start to close that agricultural frontier. I would say, maybe mistaking a little bit, but at least 80% of the land used or the land planning of the areas of post-conflict are forestry. Since 1959, the Amazon region, areas of the Pacific region, areas of the northern part of Colombia have been called the forest reserves. So the use of that land is forestry or forestry-related activities. However, today we find a lot of cattle ranching. So cocoa becomes an opportunity to start to restore and reconvert those areas of cattle ranching and coca production for cocoa. So it's in this and within this light that we started to see the possibility of discussing how we could have cocoa production guaranteeing that it won't open the agricultural frontier. Parallel to that, the World Economic Forum starts an initiative, I think in 2016 or 17, called Folge, for its name in English, which means food and land use. It's a commitment for all the agro-industry that produces food in order to commit themselves to have a strategy to guarantee food for the world without changing the use of your land and having more organic alternative, less waste, etc. So Colombia decides to be one of the deep dive countries of the initiative Follow, and we decided that within the ministry or the High Commissioner Office of Post-Conflict would be the connecting point of that initiative. And it's within Follow that we start to identify and learn about the Cocoa and Forest Initiative. Initiatives for West Africa and mainly Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire in agreements in multi-stakeholder platforms to agree to stop deforestation and start to promote good practices of cocoa, not only deforestation, but also child labor, to abolish child labor in the cocoa productions. So we started to talk with the World Cocoa Foundation that we would like to be a country that can show positive impact on the forest and cocoa and not just the negative impact. And with the blessing of the World Cocoa Foundation, with IDH and WRI, we started to work for a framework in Colombia. And last year, in June 17th, we signed the agreement with the Ministry of Agriculture, of Environment, our National Federation of Cocoa Growers, Casalucar, one of the biggest companies, chocolate companies in Colombia, and basically the IDH and WRI, also signatories of the agreement, and we started to develop our action plan.
Yeah, the action plan, what is it about? So what are the actions you want to take, and how are the smallholders in Colombia reacting on that, in this initiative, which sounds very promising to me?
Like everything that you start is promising. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you start to get the challenges and obstacles that you have to overcome, which also makes it interesting. Once we started to develop the action plan, the first thing was the first signatories were only 6 members, so we have to make this a much more inclusive, participatory process, and we start to talk with the other big national company, which is called Nacional de Chocolates, which between both of them, Casa Luker and Nacional de Chocolates, they dominate at least 80 to 85% of the market. In Colombia, there's the belief, which is actually true, that there's no cocoa bean that goes unsold. There is a very dynamic national economy on cocoa. So having the other company on board was very important for us, but also constructing this action plan from the territories with the farmers. So the first thing that we did was go and we did a 5,500 kilometers of drive through all the areas of cocoa around the country, from the mountains to the Pacific, to the Amazon rainforest, to our inlands, our wetlands, if you can call them, our savannas, to learn what was happening in those territories. And it was magnificent. Everybody feels they are a cocoa farmer. Some are more cocoa farmers than others, but they cherish, they care for the tree of cocoa. And it means a lot for everyone. We drink hot chocolate in the morning, in the afternoon. It's part of our social, it's like a coffee almost. It's like as having a coffee, but it's more family oriented. It's more in your house. So everybody loves to have a cocoa tree. And as in many regions, they said, the women love their cocoa trees because it's the cash flow. If other crop is not working, they can always go and sell the beans and somebody will buy them, even if it's at a lower price, but somebody will always buy it. So farmers, of course, and our production of cocoa, as I said before, is in small farms. And usually they do it under any other tree for shadow. Colombia is a country of fruits. Fruits you've never seen here, you've never heard of it, you've never tasted them. You would go, wow, what is this wonder? And so you have guanábana, passion fruits, citrus, avocado, of course, rubber as well, or timber, but usually it's around. And because our small productions, the ICCO, which is the International Organization of Cocoa Growers in the World, have cataloged the Colombian cocoa as fine and flavor. All our cocoa is fine of flavor. And basically it's because it's in these arrangements. We have small arrangements. There are most of them, if they have because it's not industrial, you have very few fertilizers on it, so it has developed that special taste to it and flavor as the coffee. Very, very similar to the coffee. So the farmers, the first thing for them was, well, but why are we signing an agreement on deforestation if we don't deforest? And so the discussion is, well, because you have a positive impact on forest, and we want to promote that positive impact of the way Colombia is producing cocoa. And if cocoa becomes an alternative to coca and an interesting alternative in the post-conflict areas, we want it to be positive to the forest, and we want to make sure that we have a monitoring system that will assure us that we're not deforesting new areas for planting new cocoa, having new cocoa production. So it was for them very interesting. It was reassuring. They started to feel proud about the way they're doing it and saying, well, yes, you're right. Yes, if it becomes a profitable crop, it's important to make sure that we don't go into our areas of forest that we have. And of course, very happy to start a whole promotion of saying Colombia has cocoa with good practices. So farmers are been very well, they receive with surprise, but with enthusiasm, the initiative. And so we had 280 conversations with 280 associations of cocoa growers to get their input on what they would feel or need or see that would be important activities that we could put down on paper in an action plan to 2030. We identify in that process also with conversations, of course, and dialogues and workshops at the national level with the ministries, the National Federation of Cocoa Growers, with the two companies, with a lot of NGOs that are working on cocoa and forest as well, with donors, the Swiss GIZ, the UK government, USAID, and with maybe 20 or 25 organizations nationwide, we started to develop our action plan, which was launched in September 16th. And the action plan goes to 2030. And there's 5 strategic goals that we have set ourselves for the next 10 years.
In your country, there are still many challenges that you're facing, and also for the Cocoa Forests and Peace Initiative. But on the other hand, you showed us that there are a lot of opportunities as well. What I would like to know now to close our podcast is, how do you look into the future? What are your most pressing challenges?
Well, there are many challenges, but if I'm absolutely sincere, our biggest challenge is to see if the international market reacts positively to Colombian cocoa. Colombia has very small participation in the international market. We only export 0.6% of the beans of Colombia are part of the international market. If we're going to grow, it has to be well received in the international market. And that's our biggest challenge. Because imagine opening new expectations to areas and people that have lived for 50 years in conflict. And we put them to plant wonderful agroforestry projects with all best practices, and the market doesn't respond. We're creating actually new conflicts. And so our biggest challenge, if you ask me, what doesn't allow me go to bed in peace, it's that. Are we going to be able to find those buyers abroad that are willing to support the peace process, to to pay an extra price, to go along with partners on equal terms, which are these farmers, these producers in these areas that are areas that have lived with conflict for 60 years and don't have probably the competitive advantage of other areas. That's my biggest challenge for the future.
Okay, thank you very much, Wendy, for all the insights of the action plan, the insights of the initiative, and the background information about the political situation in Colombia. And thanks for your time. We are at the end of our episode. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for our next episode, which will go online in 2 weeks.